All right, let's get ready for another deep dive. And today, we are going to be looking at Seth Godin's The Dip, a little book that teaches you when to quit and when to stick. Have you ever felt like you're just kind of stuck, spinning your wheels?
Yeah.
Not really sure whether you should stick with something or move on? Well, Godin has got some pretty radical ideas about how quitting strategically can actually be the key to success. So let's unpack all this with our experts.
It's interesting that Godin really kind of flips the script on this whole never give up mentality. He really argues that the real key is knowing what to quit and when to quit. And he starts off with this really bold statement. He says, to really succeed, you need to aim to be the best in the world.
Okay, wait a minute. Best in the world. Right. That sounds a little intimidating, don't you think? I mean, are we all supposed to be like Olympic gold medalists here?
Yeah. Well, Godin's not talking about global domination in like a literal sense. What he's really talking about is finding your niche, that specific area where you can truly excel, and becoming the undisputed champion of that space. Think about it like this. Remember that example from the book about the Supreme Court law clerk?
Yeah. The one where if you land that job, it pretty much sets you up for like a stellar legal career.
Exactly. That's the one. But here's the thing. Thousands of incredibly talented law school grads apply for those clerkships, but only a handful get chosen. And it's not because all the other ones weren't smart or capable. It's because somewhere along the line, they quit striving to be the absolute best in that particular world.
So it's not about being the best at everything. It's more about like identifying your lane and owning it. Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this. But how do we even begin to figure out what our like best in the world niche is?
Well, that's where Godin introduces this concept of the dip. He actually visualizes different challenges as curves. You've got the dip, the cul-de-sac, and the cliff.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. The dip. That sounds kind of familiar. I feel like I've been in a few dips in my life.
Oh, we all have. Think back to a time when you were learning something new, and it was tough. Maybe you were struggling with a new coding language, or trying to master like a really challenging musical instrument. That frustrating, discouraging phase, that's the dip.
Oh, yeah. I definitely know that feeling. It's like that point where you're questioning whether it's even worth the effort.
And that's exactly why the dip is so important. Godin argues that the people who persevere through the dip, the people who push through that resistance, those are the ones who come out on the other side as like the experts, the leaders. He even says that the dip is a shortcut to success because it acts as a filter. It weeds out those who aren't truly committed.
So the dip is actually like a good thing? It's a sign that we're on the right track?
In a way, yes. It's a test of your dedication, your resilience. And the thing is, most people give up when they hit the dip. They get discouraged, they get distracted, they move on to something that's easier. But the people who stick it out, they're the ones who reap the rewards.
Okay, so the dip is a challenge that we need to like embrace, not avoid. Got it. But what about those other curves you mentioned? The cul-de-sac and the cliff. Those sound a little bit more ominous.
They are. The cul-de-sac is a dead end.
Yeah.
It's that situation where no matter how much effort you put in, you're just not going to see any real improvement. It's like driving down a street only to realize it's a dead end. You just got to turn around and go back the way you came.
So how do we spot a cul-de-sac in our own lives? Like, what are the warning signs?
That's a great question, and that's something that we'll dive into a little bit deeper later on. But for now, think of it this way. Are you putting in a lot of effort, but seeing very little progress? Are you constantly running into the same obstacles? If so, you might be stuck in a cul-de-sac.
And Godin's advice is to quit those cul-de-sacs like as quickly as possible, right? Because they're just draining our energy and resources.
Exactly. And then we have the cliff, which is perhaps the most dangerous of the three curves. This is a situation where you might experience like short-term pleasure or success, but it ultimately leads to disaster.
Okay, that does sound ominous. Give me an example, just so we know what to watch out for.
Godin compares it to smoking. It might feel good in the moment, but in the long run, it's incredibly destructive.
Right. So it's about recognizing when a path is ultimately self-sabotaging, no matter how tempting it might seem in the short term. So we've got these three distinct challenges: the dip, which we should embrace, the cul-de-sac, which we should avoid, and the cliff, which we should run from. But how do we tell them apart in real life? And how does all this tie back to the idea of being the best in the world?
That's where Godin's insights about strategic quitting really become super powerful. He argues that winners quit all the time. They just quit the right stuff at the right time.
So quitting isn't always a bad thing. It can actually be a sign of strength and strategic thinking.
Whoa.
Okay, my mind is a little blown right now.
It's a total shift in perspective. Godin uses this great analogy about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Remember how they'd always head for like the roughest terrain when the law was on their trail?
Yeah, they use like those canyons and cliffs to their advantage, knowing that their pursuers were probably going to give up.
Exactly. They were basically leveraging the dip. They understood that by pushing through the toughest challenges, they would outlast the competition. It's a brilliant metaphor for how we can use strategic quitting to stand out in a crowded marketplace.
Okay, so instead of viewing the dip as something to like fear, we should see it as an opportunity to differentiate ourselves, to prove our commitment, to become that best in the world within our niche.
Exactly. But here's the thing. You have to be able to tell the difference between strategic quitting and just failing.
Okay, so what's the difference? How do we know when we're making a smart move versus just giving up too soon?
Godin's really clear about this. He says that quitting is a conscious, deliberate decision to redirect your energy and resources toward a more promising path. It's about choosing to invest in the dips that align with your goals and your strengths, and having the wisdom to walk away from the ones that don't.
So it's not about throwing in the towel when things get tough. It's more about recognizing when a particular path is no longer serving us and having the courage to change course.
Absolutely. He even uses the example of Michael Crichton, the author of Jurassic Park. Crichton was on track for like a really prestigious career in medicine. He graduated from Harvard Medical School, completed a fellowship, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
But he realized that his heart just wasn't in it, so he quit medicine and pursued writing instead.
Wow. That's a pretty bold move, especially after investing so much time and energy into medical training.
Right. But it just highlights a really important point. It's okay to abandon a path, even after you've invested a ton of time and effort, if it's not leading you toward your ultimate goal. Sometimes quitting is the smartest and most courageous thing you can do.
This is making me think about all those times where I've stayed stuck in situations that clearly weren't working, just because I felt like I'd invested too much to walk away. How do we avoid that trap? How do we know when to quit?
Godin offers 3 crucial questions to ask yourself before quitting anything. The first one is, are you panicking? Quitting should always be a strategic decision, not an emotional reaction.
So don't make any rash decisions in the heat of the moment. Take a step back, assess the situation, and then decide.
Exactly. Second question, who are you trying to influence? Is it a specific person, like a difficult boss? Or is it a larger group, like an entire market?
Because trying to win over one stubborn person is a lot different than trying to win over a whole market.
It is. Godin compares influencing a single person to banging your head against a brick wall. Their beliefs and biases might be so entrenched that changing their mind is nearly impossible.
Oh, wow.
But influencing a market is more like climbing a hill. You can make gradual progress, gain momentum, and eventually reach the summit.
Okay, so sometimes walking away from a specific person or situation, even if it's difficult, can actually help you make progress toward your larger goals.
Exactly. It's about focusing your energy where you'll have the biggest impact. And that leads us to Godin's third question, and perhaps his most important one. What sort of measurable progress are you making? Are you moving forward, even if it's incremental? Or are you just spinning your wheels?
So it's not just about gut feeling. It's about having like objective data to support your decision.
Exactly. If you can honestly say that you're making progress, even if it's slow, then pushing through the dip is probably the right move. But if you're stuck, if you're not seeing any tangible results, despite your best efforts, then it might be time to reevaluate your strategy.
And that reevaluation might lead you to the conclusion that quitting is actually the smartest and most strategic option. This whole conversation is really shifting my perspective on quitting. I'm starting to see it as like a powerful tool for growth and achievement, rather than something to be ashamed of.
That's exactly the mindset shift that Godin is encouraging. He wants us to reclaim the power of quitting and use it to our advantage. It's not about giving up on our dreams. It's about being smart about how we pursue them.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've learned about the importance of being the best in the world, how to identify our own dips, and how to distinguish between strategic quitting and just plain failing. So what other insights does Godin offer as we continue this deep dive into the dip?
One of the things that Godin keeps coming back to is this idea that quitting is not the same as failing. In fact, he argues that quitting strategically can actually help you avoid failure in the long run.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's about being proactive, about making conscious choices, instead of just letting circumstances dictate your path.
Right. Quitting intelligently lets you redirect your energy and resources towards the things that you're truly passionate about, the things where you have the greatest potential to really excel.
It's like pruning a tree. You got to cut away the dead branches so that the healthy ones can flourish.
That's a perfect analogy. And Godin even challenges this whole idea of just coping with a situation. He says that coping is basically delaying the inevitable. Like, if the best you can do is cope, you're probably better off quitting and finding something that you can actually thrive in.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that in the past. Staying in jobs or relationships that weren't working just because I was afraid of the unknown.
I think we've all been there, but Godin's message is really clear. Coping is a waste of time and energy. It keeps you stuck in mediocrity.
So how do we break free from that coping mentality?
Well, it starts with being honest with yourself. Are you genuinely passionate about what you're doing? Are you making progress towards your goals? Or are you just going through the motions if it's the latter? Then it might be time to consider a change.
He also talks about something called serial quitting. What's that all about?
Serial quitters are those people who are constantly starting new projects, but they never actually finish anything. You know, they get all excited about something, they dive in head first, but then they hit the dip and they bail.
Oh yeah, I know a few people like that. They're always chasing the next shiny object.
Godin compares them to shoppers who are constantly switching lines at the supermarket, thinking they're going to find a faster checkout.
But they end up starting over every time, so they never actually make any real progress.
Exactly. He says that same pattern can play out in our careers, our relationships, even our hobbies. We hop from one thing to the next, never giving ourselves the time to really develop mastery.
And we miss out on the satisfaction that comes from sticking with something, pushing through that dip, and emerging on the other side as a true expert.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key point, the importance of deciding in advance when to quit. Godin talks about how ultramarathoners set these predetermined conditions that will cause them to drop out of a race. You know, they know their limits,
Right.
and they stick to their plan.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you wait until you're like in the middle of the dip, when you're exhausted and frustrated, it's way harder to make a clear-headed decision.
Absolutely. Having a plan in place helps you remove the emotion from the equation and make a more strategic choice. You're not quitting because you're weak. You're quitting because you've reached a predetermined point where it makes sense to redirect your energy.
It's about being in control of your own destiny.
Right. And it's also about recognizing that quitting can sometimes be the catalyst for innovation.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, Godin uses the example of the space shuttle program. He argues that if we had been willing to quit that program sooner, we might have been forced to come up with like a better, more cost-effective solution for space travel.
So sometimes clinging to the status quo, even if it's familiar and comfortable, can actually stifle progress.
It can. Quitting can create a vacuum, a space for new ideas to kind of emerge and take root.
I'm starting to see just how powerful this concept can be. It's not just about giving up. It's about creating space for something better to come along.
Exactly. And Godin reminds us that quitting is not just about external success. It's also about personal growth. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, even if that means making some tough decisions along the way.
It's about being brave enough to challenge your own assumptions and step outside of your comfort zone.
Absolutely. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that's no longer serving you, even if you've invested a ton of time, energy, or money into it.
It's about recognizing that your time and energy are precious resources, and you deserve to invest them in things that truly matter. I've really enjoyed diving deep into this book with you. Godin's ideas have definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's such a refreshing perspective on success and achievement.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the dip, I want to leave our listener with a question that Godin poses in his book. He asks, what is one cul-de-sac you're currently in? And what could you achieve if you had the courage to quit it today?
It's a powerful question to reflect on, because sometimes quitting is the most empowering choice you can make.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.